Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everybody. Today, we're diving deep into the world of hydrogeology, more specifically, hydrogeology's critical role in the mining industry. We'll be taking a close look at some really interesting resources from RoleCatcher, especially their career guide on, you guessed it, becoming a hydrogeologist. So get ready to learn why these often overlooked professionals are essential in ensuring mining is done both safely and sustainably.
You're right. It's not the first thing that springs to mind when you think about mining, is it? I mean, everyone's thinking about digging up gold and copper and all that, but what about the water below the surface? What impact does all this have on the water? That's where our hydrogeologists come in.
Right, so it's more than just testing the water, is that what you're saying?
Oh, absolutely. Imagine having to figure out how groundwater will flow through an area that's being totally upended by a mining operation. That's a huge part of a hydrogeologist's job, and they use incredibly complex computer models to simulate this, factoring in everything from the type of geology to the water table levels, and even the potential for contamination from the mining itself.
Wow, that's a lot to consider. I bet getting those predictions right is critical. What happens if they're off? What are the consequences?
Oh, the consequences can be really serious, honestly. You could have contamination of water supplies, which obviously has huge implications for people and the environment. You could see serious damage to nearby ecosystems. And from a business perspective, the mining company could face some very hefty fines, even legal action. It's really high stakes, this field. It demands a lot of precision and a deep understanding of how water and geology affect each other.
Absolutely. Speaking of which, RoleCatcher's Guide does a fantastic job of explaining the career path for aspiring hydrogeologists. They begin with the entry-level position, the assistant hydrogeologist. So for someone fresh out of university, what can they realistically expect in this role?
It's a very hands-on role, which
Yeah.
is great for someone who's, raring to go and apply all that academic knowledge they've just acquired. They're eager to get out there. And according to RoleCatcher, an assistant hydrogeologist would be doing a bit of everything, really, from collecting groundwater samples to helping to install those monitoring wells you mentioned.
So it's safe to assume there's a lot of time spent outdoors, getting those boots muddy.
You got it. It's all about conducting those field investigations to get a real sense of those pre-existing water conditions. Things like the water quality, of course, but also the quantity, and even how fast and in what direction the groundwater is flowing. All of this is crucial data that feeds directly into those models we talked about before.
It sounds like a really great way to learn the ropes, to build a really strong foundation in those practical aspects of hydrogeology. What's next on this career ladder? What comes after assistant hydrogeologist?
Well, as you can imagine, with more experience under your belt, you'd likely move up to a junior hydrogeologist position. Now, this is where you start shouldering more of that responsibility for assessing the environmental impact of the actual mining operation itself.
So does that mean less field work and more time analyzing data?
Not necessarily less field work, but definitely a lot more responsibility when it comes to analyzing all that data, right? And understanding what it actually means, but in the context of the whole mining operation. They'd be the ones using specialized software to model the groundwater flow, to predict where contamination plumes might occur, that kind of thing, and of course assessing how effective various mitigation strategies are.
So you need a good analytical mind to be a junior hydrogeologist. Those problem-solving skills must be top-notch. I notice RoleCatcher also stresses the importance of communication skills for junior hydrogeologists. Why is that?
They're scientists, right? Exactly, but at this level, it's not just about you and the numbers, you know? They're no longer just crunching numbers by themselves. They're starting to communicate their findings to a much broader audience, some technical, some not. So we're talking reports, presentations, even just explaining really complex data in a way that, let's say, the management team can easily grasp.
Gotcha. It does sound like quite challenging, but also a very rewarding role,
Yeah.
especially if you enjoy both the, like you said, that technical side of science as well as the communication aspect. So what's the next rung on this ladder? What's after junior hydrogeologist?
So RoleCatcher calls this the mid-career stage, and they just call it hydrogeologist.
No senior this or principal that, just hydrogeologist.
Pretty straightforward, right? But don't let the simple title fool you at all, because the responsibilities get a whole lot more complex.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What are we talking about here? Lay it on me.
So at this point, it's less about managing day-to-day tasks and more about, think of it like overseeing entire projects. A hydrogeologist at this level is responsible for designing and then, of course, leading those hydrogeological investigations, conducting those very complex modeling and simulation studies we talked about, and overall providing expert advice on water resource management and making sure everything is compliant with regulations.
I'm starting to think a master's degree would be pretty important at this level, maybe even crucial.
I think you're spot on. Because you need such a depth of knowledge at this level, a more advanced degree is often essential. And that deeper understanding of hydrogeology is so important because now you're not just identifying potential impacts, but actually evaluating them and coming up with solutions. This could be anything from designing the networks that monitor the water to deciding if the water treatment systems are doing their job, or even having to come up with a remediation plan if, unfortunately, contamination is detected.
Remediation. Okay, that sounds intense. What does that entail exactly?
Yeah, so that's essentially the process of cleaning up and then, ideally, fully restoring those contaminated water sources. It's a whole specialized field requiring, again, a deep understanding of how contaminants spread, the various techniques to clean them up, and, of course, a good dose of creative problem solving to adapt those techniques to each unique site. No two sites are the same, right?
Absolutely. Sounds like the stakes are pretty high when it comes to remediation. Definitely wouldn't want to mess that up. So what does RoleCatcher's guide say about, let's say, the top of the mountain, that pinnacle of the hydrogeology career path, the
Yeah.
senior hydrogeologist? What does it take to get there?
Well, by this stage, you've climbed that career ladder, honed your skills, and, just like RoleCatcher's guide points out, likely earned a PhD in hydrogeology. You're at the top of your game.
And I'm assuming years of hands-on experience also play a major role here.
For sure. At this level, a senior hydrogeologist isn't just managing projects anymore. They're the ones leading and mentoring whole teams of hydrogeologists. Just imagine being the person responsible for developing long-term water resource management plans for an entire mining operation, sometimes multiple operations.
So they're looking a decade or more into the future, trying to predict water needs that far out,
Wow.
ensuring that everything is sustainable in the long run.
Exactly. They're the ones advising those high-level managers on anything and everything related to water. They're collaborating with those government agencies on all those regulations and compliance issues. And of course, they're the ones mentoring and guiding that next generation of hydrogeologists.
Okay, so that's a lot of responsibility.
Hmm.
Is it as stressful as it sounds, being a senior hydrogeologist?
Well, I'm not going to lie, it can be incredibly demanding. But RoleCatcher does highlight some of the perks of reaching such a senior level. And believe me, they're pretty sweet perks.
Okay, I'm all ears. What kind of perks are we talking about here? What are the rewards of reaching the top of the hydrogeology ladder?
Well, for one, you have a level of autonomy and influence within the company that's just unparalleled. You're the expert, the go-to person for anything related to water, and your expertise is highly valued, which is always great. But I think for a lot of people, the best part is you get to see the impact of all your hard work. You know you are directly contributing to more sustainable and responsible mining practices, and that's a pretty good feeling. And if that's not enough, there's often the possibility of international travel because, as you know, mining operations are all over the world.
International travel, a position of influence, helping to make mining more sustainable. It's really quite something. And it all starts with muddy boots. Earlier, we touched on the importance of professional development for hydrogeologists. RoleCatcher mentions this too. Why is that so crucial in this field?
Well, hydrogeology is constantly evolving. It's not a static field by any means. New technologies pop up all the time. Research is always deepening our understanding of these groundwater systems. And of course, regulations are always changing. So to really stay ahead of the curve, to really thrive, hydrogeologists need to be committed to lifelong learning, really.
So it's not just about getting those degrees and certifications and calling it a day.
Mm.
You need to actively be learning, be expanding your knowledge all the time. What does that look like, practically speaking?
Well, RoleCatcher highlights several avenues, and attending industry conferences and workshops is a big one, as well as pursuing additional certifications and just keeping up with those research publications. Speaking of which, a professional geologist, PG for short, license is a pretty big deal for a lot of hydrogeologists.
A PG, okay. What does it take to earn that?
It's pretty rigorous, not gonna lie. Typically, it's a combination of education, obviously, but also years of experience in the field, working under the supervision of a licensed PG, and then you have to pass a series of exams, and they're not easy. It's really a way to demonstrate a high level of competency, but also, and this is important, a commitment to ethical conduct within the field of geology.
I can see how that would be really valuable in a field as specialized as this. So, a lot of work, but worth it in the end. Speaking of valuable, I'm curious, what does RoleCatcher say about the job market for hydrogeologists? Are there a lot of jobs?
Yeah, they actually highlight the growing demand for these professionals, which makes sense when you think about it.
Yeah, with the increasing focus on making mining more sustainable, on finding that balance between getting those resources and protecting the environment, I can absolutely see why hydrogeologists would be in high demand.
Absolutely, and it's only going to increase as we grapple with things like climate change and water scarcity. The world needs hydrogeologists now more than ever, to be honest, and not just in mining. Their expertise is going to be needed across the board in a lot of different industries.
It sounds like a career with a pretty bright future then. But before someone can land that dream hydrogeology job, chances are they're going to face some pretty tough interview questions, which is where, in my opinion, RoleCatcher really shines with their incredible interview prep resources.
I know, right? Their platform is amazing. It's got this massive database of real interview questions that they've collected, all tailored specifically to the field of hydrogeology. It's a gold mine.
So give us a sneak peek. What kind of questions can aspiring hydrogeologists expect to get thrown at them?
Oh, they've got it all. Questions to really assess your technical knowledge, like, can you walk me through the different methods for conducting a pumping test? Or what are the key factors to consider when designing a groundwater monitoring network for this type of mine? That kind of thing.
So pretty specific, very technical.
Yeah, they want to make sure you know your stuff. But it's not all technical because they also have questions that are designed to see how you problem solve. For example, tell me about a time you had to troubleshoot a challenging situation out in the field. Or, how would you approach mitigating the impact of a contaminant plume on a nearby water supply?
Okay, those are tough.
Yeah.
It's like they're trying to get inside your head to see not just what you know, but how you think, how you'd actually apply that knowledge in the real world under pressure.
Exactly. And then, of course, there are questions that are all about, gauging your understanding of the ethical and environmental considerations that come with hydrogeology, which circles back to what we were talking about earlier, that balance between the needs of mining and protecting the environment.
Right, finding that balance. And that actually reminds me of one of the questions RoleCatcher highlights in their guide. It really stood out to me, and it's, how does a hydrogeologist contribute to environmental protection in mining activities? Oh. I mean, it's such a crucial part of the job. And I'm guessing interviewers want to know that you really get that you take it seriously.
Right, because it's not just about digging things up anymore. It's about doing it in a way that minimizes the damage, that minimizes the environmental footprint. And hydrogeologists are really on the front lines of that whole effort.
And speaking of being on the front lines, RoleCatcher mentions this really fascinating aspect of their platform, an AI-powered interview practice tool they call Copilot. Tell me more about this. This sounds interesting.
Oh, this is where it gets really cool. So imagine this. You're practicing your interview answers, right? And you're getting personalized feedback from an AI that's analyzed thousands, maybe even millions of interviews. It's crazy. Copilot will assess everything from how fast you're talking and if you're speaking clearly to your body language and even your word choices. And then it gives you specific advice on how to improve, how to appear more confident and knowledgeable.
It's like having a personal interview coach in your pocket. That's incredible.
That's a great way to put it. And for someone who tends to get nervous in interviews, which, let's be honest, is a lot of us, this kind of AI feedback can be a game changer. It allows you to practice in a safe space, figure out your weaknesses, and hone those answers until you're completely ready for that interview.
It's amazing how technology is changing the way we prepare for jobs these days. But let's go back to RoleCatcher's guide for a moment. There's a section on the importance of collaboration in hydrogeology, and I think that's really interesting. Why is collaboration so essential in this line of work?
Because hydrogeological projects are rarely solo endeavors, you're right. It's all about teamwork. We're talking engineers, environmental scientists, geologists, obviously, but also regulatory officials, and importantly, the local communities. It's essential to have effective collaboration to ensure that every perspective is considered, that any potential risks are identified early on, and that the whole project aligns with environmental regulations, but also with community values.
It's about finding that balance again, isn't it?
Yeah.
Balancing the needs of the mining company with the need to protect the water, but also the well-being of the people who live in these communities. It sounds challenging, but ultimately very rewarding.
It absolutely is. It's a unique challenge and one that hydrogeologists are really well suited to handle because they have that understanding of how complex these groundwater systems are. They can predict and hopefully mitigate the environmental impacts. And maybe most importantly, they're committed to ethical and sustainable practices.
Speaking of ethical and sustainable practices, RoleCatcher's guide doesn't shy away from addressing the potential downsides of mining. What are some of the key environmental concerns that hydrogeologists are tasked with addressing? What are the big ones?
Well, as we've discussed, mining can have a pretty big impact on water resources, and we're talking about surface water, like rivers and lakes, but also the groundwater, which is often overlooked. And one of the biggest concerns is contamination, especially from mine tailings.
Okay, so mine tailings, for those of us who aren't hydrogeologists, can you remind us what that is exactly and why it's so dangerous?
Right, so mine tailings are essentially the leftover rock and wastewater that's generated as a byproduct of the mining process. It's the stuff that's left over once they've extracted the valuable ores and minerals.
And this is dangerous
Because it can contain all sorts of nasty stuff, things you definitely don't want in your water supply. We're talking heavy metals, like arsenic, lead, mercury, those are the big ones, but also things like cyanide, depending on the type of mining operation. And if this stuff makes its way into the groundwater or nearby rivers and streams, it's obviously a major threat to aquatic life, to human health, even to the overall ecological balance of the whole area.
it's easy to forget sometimes, isn't it?
Hmm.
Mining is essential. We need these resources. But it's so important to remember that it can have unintended consequences if it's not done responsibly.
Right, which is exactly why the role of a hydrogeologist is so important. They're the ones assessing these potential risks, designing strategies to hopefully minimize them, and, making sure that the whole operation is adhering to environmental regulations.
So they're like guardians of the water in a way, making sure that this precious resource is protected from industrial activity.
I like that, guardians of the water. That's a good way to put it. They're stewards of sustainability, using their expertise to, again, find that delicate balance between getting the resources we need and preserving the environment for the future.
It's a big responsibility, no doubt, but it sounds like an incredibly rewarding career path, especially for someone who thrives on those intellectual challenges and being out there making a real difference in the real world.
Yeah.
It's not just sitting in a lab somewhere, right?
Absolutely not. And you just touched on a major theme we've been circling back to this whole time, which is that balance between meeting the needs of the mining industry and protecting something as essential as our water resources. It's tricky, to say the least. There are no easy answers, but it's a question that hydrogeologists are wrestling with every single day.
And it's a question that impacts so much more than just mining, right? I mean, as the global demand for water continues to rise and as we see more and more impacts from climate change, figuring out how to manage our water sustainably is only going to become more and more critical.
No question about it. We have to be thinking long term. The decisions we make today about how we extract resources, how we choose to manage our water, even how we protect the environment as a whole, it's going to have huge implications down the road for future generations.
It's a lot of responsibility, but also an incredible opportunity to really be a part of something bigger, to help shape a more sustainable future. RoleCatcher actually touches on this, the idea of making mining more sustainable. So what are some of the specific ways that hydrogeologists are contributing to this? What are they doing on the ground?
Well, for one, they're playing a leading role in developing and actually implementing these water management plans that are specifically designed to minimize the impact of mining on nearby water sources. This could involve something like, designing better dewatering systems so they're not using as much water in the first place. Or it could mean coming up with ways to treat the wastewater from the mine to remove those contaminants before it's released back into the environment. Or even using some pretty innovative techniques to prevent contamination of those groundwater aquifers altogether. It's really impressive.
So the focus is shifting. It's not just about cleaning up the mess afterward. It's about preventing it from happening in the first place.
Right.
Getting ahead of the problem.
Exactly. Remediation is always a last resort. The goal now is prevention, and hydrogeologists are really driving that shift. And what's really interesting is they're working directly with mining companies to basically design more sustainable practices from the get-go, from day one. So we're talking about incorporating things like water conservation, pollution prevention, even ecosystem protection. All of that is becoming part of every single stage of the mining life cycle. which is huge.
That's great to hear. It sounds like the mining industry is taking some positive steps towards becoming more sustainable. But as we've said before, there's always that balancing act, right, between extraction and protection. So how do hydrogeologists navigate that balance? How do they find that sweet spot?
It's a constant juggling act, that's for sure. It requires that deep technical expertise, knowing the science inside and out, but it also requires that ethical awareness, remembering the bigger picture, and of course, the commitment to actually finding workable solutions, ones that work for the mining operation but also protect the environment. And hydrogeologists use their understanding of these incredibly complex groundwater systems to predict those impacts, hopefully mitigate them, and of course, they adhere to incredibly strict ethical guidelines to ensure their work is unbiased and objective because the data doesn't lie,
Mm,
right? Ultimately, it's about finding innovative ways to meet the economic demands because let's face it, mining is important, but doing it in a way that doesn't sacrifice the long-term health of our planet. It's a delicate dance.
absolutely. Sounds like a career that really requires a unique combination of scientific rigor, practical problem solving, and a really strong sense of responsibility for the planet.
Mhm.
So as we start to wrap up this deep dive into the fascinating world of hydrogeology, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listeners will remember?
That's easy. Hydrogeologists are playing a truly vital role in ensuring we can meet our resource needs, but in a way that doesn't destroy our planet in the process. They're the unsung heroes of sustainability, quietly working behind the scenes to protect our most precious resources, and hopefully helping to shape a more sustainable future for all of us.
Well said. It's so important to remember that even in industries that are often seen as, at odds with environmentalism, there are these dedicated professionals working really hard to find a better way forward, to find solutions. So if you're listening to this and you're passionate about science and you have this drive to make a real tangible difference in the world, and you're, maybe a little bit fascinated by the hidden world of water beneath our feet, well, then a career in hydrogeology might just be your calling. And if you're ready to dive in, head over to RoleCatcher. Check out their website, their career guide, their platform. It's full of incredible insights and tools to help you navigate the exciting world of hydrogeology. And that's it for this deep dive. A huge thanks to our expert for joining us and sharing their incredible knowledge. And to everyone listening, we'll see you next time for another deep dive into another fascinating field. Until then, keep exploring.